So we've got quite a crowd here today. This is for here Sunday afternoon. Daniel is in our time zone, but for everybody else, UK time, it's about what, 11 in the morning, 10 in the morning, 9 in the morning, something like that. Uh, so uh, we've already started talking a bit about Yasin. In fact, has pointed out a couple of things, and I thought that I would address that first because um, Buddhism is generally confused. When people start with Buddhism, they always start with what they already know and try to fit Buddhism into that. And so, uh, in that way, we tend to make it complicated because life is complicated. And the reality is that the teachings of the Buddha are actually very, very simple. That there's not much to it, but it has to be repeated over and over and over again. It's almost like there's not much to a drop of water. But when you have drop after drop after drop in sort of a rainstorm, you can have a flood. But water is still water down to the droplet level. So this is the whole point, is that maybe we need to stop counting drops and just examine one drop. Because once you understand the Dhamma in one drop, that's all there is to it. You've heard things about water like that it's both very soft. I mean, you can put your finger, I mean, ice, you can't just shove your finger right into the thing because it's frozen. But water is a liquid and it seems to be very, very giving. It will move anywhere, except that when you get a whole lot of water moving, it can be kind of overwhelming. And so this is really the point about the Dhamma is that it needs to be repeated over and over and over and over and over again because guess what, folks? There's just not that much to it. There's just not much there. Hello, Jamie.
Hi, Jamie.
So, what is there to it? Well, the Buddha has just one teaching. He says it, in fact, there was one of the students once asked, is there any place in the suttas other than the one that I use most often where the Buddha actually says that he only teaches one thing, just one thing? And that is both formally and now. He teaches just one thing, and that is dukkha, dukkha nirodha. And if we can understand that, then we understand that drop of water is like understanding the entire Dhamma. That's all there is to it, just one little thing. Dukkha, dukkha nirodha. And that we can describe it in many thousands of ways. An example is that if you're out on the battlefield and you see an arrow coming right at you, you want to get out of its way. You don't want to get hit by it. That's an example of dukkha, dukkha nirodha. Or, pretty close to home then, the slings and arrows of outrageous conversation that you find in many public places. And that if you stand up to that, you're going to get hit by it. So the way of dukkha nirodha is actually just get out of the way. Rather than trying to resist things, we get out of its way. And so this is basically all there is to the teachings of the Buddha. And I set all of that up for the next part of the joke. And that is the reason why it is so complicated and so complex is because there have been many, many hundreds of generations with many, many thousands of people with nothing better to do than to count drops. That's all. That's what the Dhamma is. It's just a whole bunch of different people counting those drops in many, many different ways. And so that's where all of these numbering things come from. But everything, if you understand it correctly, puts everything exactly back together. One of the ways that I would describe the process is that it's like finding an old alarm clock. You know, one of those wind-up kind. It winds up the mechanism for the clock and also winds up the mechanism for the alarm. That kind of clock. But it's old and dirty and been sitting in the attic for years and years. And we're going to come break it apart, take the screws out of it, take the gears out of it, clean it up, and put it back together again in its functioning order. That's basically what the Dhamma is all about, is that we're going to take the mind apart and clean it up and put it back together. And guess what? In that clock that we've got, there's a lot of different gears, and every one of them has teeth on it. We don't have to necessarily count all the teeth on every gear. We don't have to understand it at that kind of level. But there have been people with basically nothing left to do in their lives except do that kind of stuff. And so that's why the Dhamma winds up so complicated, is because people have been counting the teeth on all the gears of the clock that they keep taking apart and looking at. And so where do we wind up with that? That gives us things like the commentaries, the Abhidhamma, famous books that have been written since that time, especially like the Pasiddhibhagga and the Visuddhimagga and other books like that, have just been written by guys who had nothing better to do with their lives, because unlike you guys, they quit doing all the stuff that you're doing and got nothing left to do but to just play with a few toys. And that's where a lot of the Dhamma has come from, is people playing with the toys because they got nothing better to do. And they intentionally made sure that they had nothing better to do, that in fact, in a way, this is the only thing there is left to do, is to play with the Dhamma as if it were a toy. But it's really a very, very simple little thing. And that I don't know if any of you have had much experience in computer science, but there's one of the things that we have that's called a binary tree. It's one of the very basic properties of it's either equal to, greater than, or less than. Okay, and if it's equal to, then it's a node. If it's less than or greater than, then it goes on the side. That way we can build a structure. An example of that is this is the way that we do a bubble sort. And then when you've got data that's sorted, we don't have to go through it every time, because if we had to go through it every time, it would take on average half the size of your database. So if you've got a million items in your database, then it would take approximately 500,000 searches to find what you were looking for, unless you organize the data. And when you have the data, say, organized in alphabetical order, then you take what character that you have here, or the data that you're looking for, and you check in the middle of the database, and it's either going to be equal to, greater than, or less than, right? So if it is actually equal to, you found your data. If it's less than, then you go down to that part of the database, let's say from A to F, or A to M. And then you look again and find out where that data is. This actually, every search that we do, we either find it or we divide the amount of data that we have to look at in half. So that means it is operating at the power of 2. It's squared. And so that makes things very much easier. The reason I'm telling you about this is because that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be looking at what kind of thoughts we're having. Are these negative thoughts? Are these positive thoughts? Or are these thoughts that are spot on in reality? And we're going to keep doing that same little process. That's the drop of water that we're looking at. What thought are we having right now? That's the whole teaching of the Buddha is wrapped up in that. And you can see that in that direction of dukkha, dukkha nirodha. Dukkha Nirodha is not what Westerners think of it, because they've been used to all of their society and all of their religions and all of things. That the whole society works like this, in the sense of it takes a long time. You have to develop. You have to go slowly, and it takes years to get a degree. Religions are complicated. That whole mentality we bring then to the teachings of the Buddha. To where, in fact, by doing so, we miss the point completely. Because whatever is available through the teachings of the Buddha is available to you right now. You don't have to go get up a whole bunch of skills. But the interesting thing is that the more we practice this one little thing of looking at the thoughts, our skill develops. It develops greatly, so that you become a kind of a different person without even noticing it. In fact, Christoph just sent me an email or a Skype note saying that whoever this Dhammarato fellow is, he's good because uh, Christoph has gotten some improvements. It's well enough that an old wife can see. Is that not true, Christoph? Okay, but it's only just one little thing that we keep doing over and over and over again, and that is improving this moment. But there is a process or a sequence of events to that we can look into that drop of water and recognize that it's got a beginning, it's got a middle, and it's got an end to it. I guess the end is when it actually leaves the faucet. Have you ever watched a leaky faucet? And it begins with a tiny little bubble, and then that bubble grows to something big, and then it gets heavy enough so that it begins to weight, and now the distance, the diameter of it gets very small as it's still clinging to the faucet and the water that's in the faucet before the final drop. Okay? Now, this is actually an introduction to the idea that the teaching of Buddha is good in the beginning, it's good in the middle, and it's good in the end. It's good while it wells up, it's good while it gets into a big old bubble ball, and then it's good when it drops. And yet, many beginners in meditation, they bring the society and all the religions and everything that we brought to it, and they wind up, when they're practicing, they think that they're not good enough yet, and so they wind up struggling. They struggle with their meditation. How many of you have ever practiced meditation and it wind up being a struggle, a job? Yeah, look at that. Okay. So here's the point then, is that when it does become a struggle, or even before it becomes a struggle, we need to look at that and say, whatever it is making this difficult or making it a struggle or making it hard is actually not the teaching of the Buddha. It's something that I brought with me instead. But the actual teachings of the Buddha are actually quite good right at the very beginning. As soon as we start practicing, we get the benefits from it. The question is, are we going to keep that leaky faucet dripping? Is it going to keep dripping? Because the thing that happens with us is that we get into society and then we forget that we could be juicy. And so we wind up getting high and dry. So if we are practicing correctly, though, it winds up being easy peasy, easy in the beginning, easy in the middle, and easy in the end as we develop the skills along the way. And the skills that we need actually are the skills that are going to help us remember more often for just one more drop of water. Because if you have a drop of water and a drop of water and a drop of water and a drop of water, pretty soon you're going to be satisfied. You're going to have all the water that you want. But if you're standing at that leaky faucet worrying about where the next drop is going to come from, that's back to the original system that we have in the West. Oh, you've got to wait. It's delayed gratification. You can't have your reward now. You can't get your day's pay. You got to get paid once a month. And so this practice here is to turn all of that around, because if you can be satisfied right now, then what's the point of working for somebody to go get something when you're already satisfied? Now, I know, because if my dad was here listening to this, he would say the same thing that he told me when I was a teenager. You're lazy. You're lazy. You're lay about, do nothing. Well, isn't that exactly the whole point of anybody joining any religious order? Oh, well, I'm going to be very close to God. I'm going to sit here and do nothing and have a conversation with God, and it's supposed to be okay in our society. Or if you're sitting there in meditation like a Buddha, then there's some value in that. And so there's kind of a scam in a way. The reality is that everybody works way too much, because we're trained to do that in our society, and the art of the Buddha is the art of laziness, the art of laying back, and that we can have the joy of doing nothing anytime that we remember to do it. And I would ask you, we can take a little poll. Which is better, working hard or doing nothing? Which is better?
Doing nothing. I vote for doing nothing.
Doing nothing. Okay. How
Yeah.
about you, Christoph? Is working hard better than doing nothing, or is doing nothing better than working hard?
It depends. Sometimes I don't see work as really work, because I quite enjoy my job. So in my case,
wrong answer. I said working hard in the sense of you want to get something.
Oh, okay. In that sense, doing nothing.
Okay, all right. That in fact, some kind of things that you can be productive at is just play. You're just enjoying yourself.
Yes.
But many times you're not productive.
Yes, that's
And
true.
one of the things that I find quite amazing is that Mother Earth sometimes does not like humans. Sometimes she does, and sometimes she don't. That in fact, if you look at it from a global perspective, the human race is quite a skin rash on poor planet Earth. And why do we do all of that digging, pumping all of that oil, and doing all of that mining and all of this stuff? Why do we do that? Is because ever how much we already have, it's not good enough. We're wanting more and more and more. Only one nation that I know of, Bhutan, has a gross national happiness index. All of the other countries have a gross national product mentality. They want to produce and to produce and to produce and to produce. And even though we produce and then get a little bit happy, that happiness fades away very quickly as soon as we think of something else that we want to produce. And so, if we can change our whole mindset back to the easy way out, because humanity has already produced way too much. I mean, almost everything that's ever been produced has already been ruined. Look at our landfill problems. Why? Because we keep throwing away everything that we bought. Maybe it would have been better if we didn't buy into that stuff at all. We didn't produce. That we can, in fact, enjoy life instead. So this is really an important point about the teaching of the Buddha, is that you can come out of your wanting, craving, clinging, and all of that you were learning from the society for our whole lives, and change our focus into why don't we start enjoying what we have right here, right now. Let's take a drop, just one little drop of joy. One little drop of joy. Let's experience that. And we keep doing that over and over and over again. Going back to that clock, we need to clean the clock and get it set to work properly rather than spending our time counting all of its gears. That the teaching of the Buddha is actually very simple. But many people ask many questions that have a variety of situations, and the Dhamma actually will fit every situation. And so what makes it a little bit complicated is how can we fit the Dhamma into the situation that we're in? And the answer to that is, let's just keep it simple. It will always work just the way that it is. So, regardless of what the problem is, if we can remember to practice correctly, taking the easy way out, then that will work on every occasion. And pretty soon we begin to see that so well that we lose all of our doubt, because almost all the complexity comes from our asking questions and doubting that this will work. Because, I mean, this is actually against everything that we've been taught for our whole lives. That if somebody gets angry at us, we're supposed to get angry back. That's what happens in all of the families. But now we're recognizing, oh no, just because this guy's gotten angry and he's in dukkha doesn't mean I've got to be in dukkha too. That's the easy way out, is just to remember that you do not have to pick up whatever is handed to you. There's actually a famous sutta about that, where the Buddha is, let us say, he's approached by some layman. And I don't remember the guy's name. I'm not sure that he ever appeared again. But he was very angry at the Buddha. And he was yakking on and on and on, and the Buddha was kind of sitting there with nothing much to do. And when the guy became quiet, took a spell, the Buddha says, well, let me ask you a question. And that is, because this guy was fairly wealthy, if you gave a big party, you got all the food, you got it all prepared, a big feast, a big dining hall, and everything like that, and nobody came to your party, who owns all of that food? The guy thought about it, and he says, well, obviously, if I've got guests and I invite them over, then they eat the food, but if nobody comes, the food is still mine. And the Buddha says, yes, well, you have just given me a meal of unhappiness, anger, and dukkha, and I choose not to eat it. I don't want your meal. So you're going to have to, keep your anger, because you can't sell it to me. All right. So if you can remember that at just the right time when you need that most, just the right time when somebody is goading you into an argument or goading you into being angry, fussing at you or something like that. Remember, you don't have to eat the meal that they have brought you. You don't have to take it. Question is, can you remember to do that? And by pulling on that thread, this is where we begin to find a little bit of complexity in the teaching of the Buddha, is because there's a sequence of events that happen inside the mind. And when we can see those events, we can recognize, oh, this is what we need to do to have one more drop of water, is first off, remember that this is a time to have a drop of joy, to have a drop of water. So that's the first thing on the path. And when we talk about it from the 7 factors of enlightenment, that same thing, that sati, when it becomes a skill, that means that it's going to be available there whenever we need it. That's why we call it an enlightenment factor, is because we remember to do the right thing when we need to remember to do the right thing. That's what sati is all about, and it's very, very common within all of the suttas. We have the Satipatthana, we have Anapanasati, we have Sati is the first item on the 7 factors of enlightenment. It's also part of the Eightfold Noble Path. So this Sati is of profound importance, because it doesn't matter what skills you have. If you don't remember to use those skills in this particular moment, those skills are of no value. This is why this is the first one. Okay, Daniel, you got a question?
Yeah, what if you become demented? Let's say someone that's an arhat, that person becomes demented. Can they get back into the craving, into the in the cycle of dependent origination?
Demented, like an
Demented.
Alzheimer's or
Right.
yeah, there's over the past century they've changed the name of it.
Dementia.
Demented is a really right. Dementia is an older word, but it's coming back into use. They have the word Alzheimer's. They have the word senility. All of that is the same thing. And you're asking about somebody who's become senile? Well, I have one example of that. That even though the woman could not hold a conversation, even to the point of the doctor getting the data out of her that he needed for the diagnosis and the transfer and all of that kind of stuff, the doctor at least put on the his report about her that at least she was in good spirits. Okay. That's kind of the answer to it is that you can be demented and still be in good spirits. You don't have to fall back into the childhood traumas, but most people do. That in fact, the problems that we learned as children continue to be problems. The older we get, the bigger the problems become. And so many old people wind up being in pretty bad shape. In fact, they've had movies about it, grumpy old men and grumpier old men. Okay, and everybody, they even talk about it in the sense of don't talk about politics at Thanksgiving because there's some uncle in there who is elderly who is going to get really upset and uptight about politics. Well, if you think about it like that, you can see that, well, he's been practicing being miserable for his whole life. By the time he's gotten old, he's really good at being miserable. And that's what you all have been practicing for your whole lives already. Then, in fact, there's a little ditty that we can talk about, and that is that our thoughts and feelings are interrelated. And we'll get into that interrelationship. But once we have a thought and a feeling, that thought is the forerunner. The mind is the forerunner for everything. You cannot say something unless you think it first. So the thought then becomes the words, the sounds, the language, the voice. When we voice things over and over again, they become an action. We have thoughts and feelings, then voice, we say it, then we do it. And if we keep doing it, like a drop of water over and over again, that develops a habit. And if we develop that habit over and over again, that habit becomes our destiny. And the older we get, the more firm that destiny gets ground in because of those habits, because of the repeated actions, because of the repeated voices that we sound, just because we keep repeating those same kind of thoughts over and over and over again. What kind of thoughts? The thoughts that we learned when we were little kids, the thoughts that children have in order to deal with the complicated world that they find themselves in. The world is not simple as it should be. It's complicated because all of the people that this child meets already has their layers of complexity right back into history. So you can't blame your parents for your problems because they picked up their problems. They gave you your problems from their parents. Well, their parents picked up their problems from their parents, and it just keeps going back into history, and we keep repeating the same things over and over again because this is learned in childhood. So, what we're going to be practicing now is that very simple little thing of changing the thoughts that we have and changing the feelings we have. Because if we change the thoughts and feelings that we have and practice doing that, pretty soon it comes kind of natural. And so it kind of leaks out. The thoughts and feelings that we have leak out into our speech. And surprise, surprise, the wife even catches that. She didn't catch that you'd been changing your thoughts, but she caught that you had changed your language a bit. And when we change our language, then we change our actions. And when our actions change, then we change our habits. And when our habits change, we change our destiny. In this regard, there is no such thing as free will. You know, the Christians, they've got a big deal about free will. And I would say that when we are following our destiny, we have no free will. We're doing what we were told to do, whether that came from mommy or some sky daddy or some religion or whatever. We're just doing what we were told to do. And we've been promised that will do. That'll be okay. You may not get any value out of it now, but when you die, then you'll get your reward. So we practice ignorantly from the time that we're children. Every one of you is a whole lot smarter, a whole lot wiser now than you were when you were, say, 2 years old. But that's the time when children learn. We learn so much at a young age, but our learning is often faulty. Why is it faulty? Because we're just following along. We're just going along to get along like everybody else. So, if we continue to do that, that will be our destiny. The question is, can you change your destiny? The answer to that is you can change your destiny if you can change your thoughts. You can change your destiny because you can change your habits. You can change your habits because you're changing your actions. You can change your actions because you're changing your words. And you're changing your words because you're changing your thoughts and your feelings. This is where it's so basic, is to keep coming back to right here, right now. Look at how we feel. Look at what kind of thoughts we're having. And then the right effort to make a change. To remember to look and to make a change. To remember to look and to make a change over and over and over again. Those little things, that's the order. To remember to look and to make a change. If we do that on a regular basis over and over again, a kind of a remarkable thing happens. And that is we begin to change our attitude. Because we're changing our thoughts. We're changing our attitude. And the thing that is so amazing about the attitude change is that we're beginning to feel successful. I can do this. I can change my mind. I can think differently. I can make an improvement. I can take control of my own mind. That's amazing. To be able to take control over your own life, to take control over your own mind. Because you see, when we were children, we were born as a victim, held up by the heels and beaten until we scream. And then we're put to work. Go to the first grade. Do what you're told to do. Learn your ABCs. Learn your 1, 2, 3s. Do it. And don't enjoy it. Just do it. And so this is how we're all raised. And we continue with that. I mean, we pick these skills up. We picked those things up when we were children, and we are only now recognizing that we can question that. We can actually question what we're doing and why. And mostly, especially what we're doing right now and why. To look at it and recognize that we can make a change. And when we do that over and over and over again, we begin to change our attitude. And the Pali, that's the Samma Sankappa, which is the fourth item on the Eightfold Noble Path, is to recognize that we can change our attitude. Everyone is born a victim. Every child remains a victim. We are a victim of the school. We're a victim of the students. We're a victim of the churches, victims of society, and eventually become victims of the government. And what we're going to do with that one little drop over and over and over again is to change our attitude about a victim. You're not a victim. You're whatever your mind is. And if your mind chooses to become a champion, then you become a champion. That's the whole thing that most people don't realize, is that we actually manufacture our own reality. And how do we manufacture that? Is because we take the reality that's coming in all the time. There's a flood of reality happening, and we'll pick up something and then compare it to something that we did in the past and come up with a conclusion about reality now that's generally off base, because the things that we compared it with were picked up in the ignorance. And so it's a much better practice then is to deal with the reality that we have right now, and then deal with the next reality right here in the moment, and not pay much attention to what happened in the past. One way of looking at it is that whatever happened to each one of you in the past, doesn't matter what happened. The fact is that you're here now. So whatever happened in the past is good enough because it got you here now, but it's old and it's dead. The example that I would use is, imagine that you took a train from this city to that city. And when you get off the train, do you carry the train with you? No, you're finished with the train. Get off of it already. Go about your life happily and don't carry the train around. So we can just leave our past behind. We don't need the past anymore. What we need is wise attention to what's happening right now. This is the teaching of the Buddha, is to avoid the dukkha that's happening right now, rather than trying to fix the old dukkhas. I mean, if you get into the habit of trying to fix the old dukkha, there's no end to it. If you try to fix society, there's no end to it. But here we can fix at least one thing, and that is what thoughts we're having right now. How do I feel right now? This is the whole thing to it. And so this is why we would talk about that sati comes first. Remembering. And this is why sati is actually the first item on the Sambojana, or the 7 factors of enlightenment. Because the 7 factors of enlightenment are nothing but the Eightfold Noble Path in its completion. Just like first grade is identical, without a doubt, is absolutely identical to your thesis or getting the PhD. It's the same thing. We keep doing it over and over again. We start with first grade and it gets a little bit more complicated, but the learning and the process remains the same. And even in college, we still feel the same way that we felt in high school, which is the same thing that we felt when we were in junior elementary school, which is the same thing that we felt when we were in first grade. And we keep thinking, oh, I keep going and going and going and going. Eventually, there'll be some value in it. And the whole teaching of the Buddha is to recognize we can have our value right now. Yes, Scott.
I was just going to ask, what's the difference or correlation between right view and sati? Because I know right view comes first.
Well, it comes right. Yeah, you've been reading 117. Right view comes first, in the sense that you would not ever perhaps practice sati if you didn't have a new kind of understanding. That's why it comes first. But chronologically, in this moment, sati and right view or right looking come together. It's within a tenth of a second or so of each other, and they work together. And then we add the third one, right effort. And the Buddha talks about it in that sutta that you're referencing, is that these three things run and circle around each other. They become the same thing, and they also help each other. That this is part of the skill development. And that what we get from that is success. And that's where the Sammasankappa comes in. That fourth item on the list comes into play because we recognize that something has changed now. We're actually changing. We're getting value out of this. And so that's why the Buddha talks about it, that right viewing comes first. Because if you don't see that you could use sati, you won't develop it. So this is why it comes first. However, once it gets into the mix, these things run and circle around each other. They become part of the package. So that if you do remember, then you will look, and if you do look, you will change, and if you do change, you'll get a big kick out of it. Those are the four big items on the Eightfold Noble Path. And that by the way, in that sutta, the Buddha talks about it. Let me tell you about right, noble unification of mind with its supports and features. With its supports and features. There are supports, and that's what we're talking about. And if we get these four supports, then the surface will become stable. If we do have sati and looking and seeing, and then we take that looking and seeing and make a change to it, improve it, play with it as a toy, enjoy. And as we do that, we become safe and secure because we are off away from other people. This is not a dangerous situation. We have to actually start working with the feelings of feeling safe. We practice feeling safe over and over again. We get the body comfortable, and then we practice being comfortable, safe, secure, and comfortable. And when we keep practicing that over and over again and having the thoughts of safe, secure, and comfortable, then the next thing that kicks in is satisfaction. We become satisfied with this present moment. And with that satisfaction then comes success. That satisfaction and success then is the piti and the sukha of the Anapanasati Sutta, and it's the Sammasankappa of the Eightfold Noble Path. It's just different ways of looking at it. It's not complicated at all. It's very, very simple. Scott, you still got your hand up.
Oh, yeah, I have another question.
All right.
Oh, word that I see a lot in the translations of the suttas is mental proliferation.
Oh, that's out of the Honeyball Sutra number 18.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I like this word. Like, I like mental proliferation, but I would like to hear like the Dhammarato version, like explain what that means. Mental proliferation.
The mental proliferations is basically once the horse is out of the barn, where does he go? He just goes all over the place, right? Including getting into a mess, getting into the creek, getting into the briars, getting into the lion's den, getting into the snake farm, all kinds of places that the horse can go to. That's the mental proliferations of the mind. Once you let the mind go in the habits that it's gone in, there's basically, I would say it like this, not in a philosophical way, there's no end to it. And there literally will be no end to it until something changes. In this case, we're actually going to intentionally make the change. that we're not going to let the mind mentally proliferate and just go all over the place. And feelings operate with that. So whatever you're feeling like, if you're feeling uncomfortable and dissatisfied, say with an election, there's no end to the proliferation that you can go to about how bad things are. Just because you lost an election. Okay, well, elections happen every 2 years. Sometimes you win a few and sometimes you lose a few. But look how many people will have so much mental proliferations over the election. That's what we mean by mental proliferations, is that the mind just spins on, and that controls our feelings, but our feelings also point and direct the proliferation. So the mind and the feelings work together, and in many cases, the student, especially the beginning student, feels out of control with that. We use language like, I am angry. Where in fact, no, it's not you that's angry, but anger is there as a feeling. And if we can observe it, then we can become the observer. Oh, I see the anger. And now you're not the anger anymore. If we can observe the anger as anger, then it's given up most of its control, because before we could see it and deal with it, it controlled us. We went wild with it. You know, they say follow your feelings or whatever. And this is instinctual. And our society is quite instinctually oriented, which means that people are not thinking very much. They let these mental proliferations that are based on feelings just run wild. And the wildness then is dangerous. This is what dukkha really is being dissatisfied with one thing, and then we find something else to be dissatisfied with, and then another thing, and then another thing, and here we're proliferating, being dissatisfied sometimes with things that didn't happen or don't exist. Because we want to keep that unhappiness and that mentality going, not recognizing that we're actually in control of it. We're actually already in control of it, even though we feel out of control with it. So we need to actually practice controlling it, to not let the mind proliferate. Or possibly within the Buddha's context, we want it to proliferate in a particular direction, into a wholesome direction. Yes, Scott, so you're back again.
Yeah, okay. I have another question about a sutta about it gave, like, I think 2 or 3 methods for stilling the thought formation, or changing the thought to, or getting rid of an unwholesome thought. And then it said that if those don't work, like if those 3 ways don't work, which is like pretty much the ways that you talk about, then like it says to like clench your jaw and like force it out. Like, do you know which one I'm talking about?
Yes, I do. I know
Yeah.
which sutta that comes from, and it talks
Yeah.
about with the teeth clenched and the tongue forcing at the roof of the mouth.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't necessarily recommend that, but you could do it if what you're thinking about is so painful that you've got to drive the thought out and it keeps coming back. Then that's the way. It has a lot to do with determination. But the easier way to do it is by thinking happy thoughts rather than being angry at the thoughts. You see, that's why all of these other methods are introduced first. Because that last one is when things are really, really bad for the monk. And most of us are not ready to put that kind of dedication into it. So it's better just to take the easy way out. All right. Possibly an example of that is that you're really, really angry at some uncle and you keep having thoughts of killing him. Those are the kind of thoughts then that no matter what happens, you need to get those kind of thoughts out of the mind. Okay, really, really harmful, hurtful thoughts, but we get attached to them because you know that uncle, what an asshole he is. And so down that tube of proliferations we go. And so that would be the bottom line of it, is that yes, above all else, let's get rid of those unwholesome thoughts. That's how powerful they are, and that's why we need to keep track of them with sati. Okay, that if we have the sati and the investigation and the effort, the right effort together, then we don't have to do the kind of stuff that you were mentioning. That's really definitely last resort kind of stuff. Daniel.
Maybe a bit of a silly question, but I was thinking about this yesterday, and you just said asshole. So I was wondering, what about using swearing as a habit? Because I have the habit with my friends to use a lot of swearing to put force behind my speaking. So
right.
is that a bad habit?
Well, it's a bad habit when you say so, because you just labeled it as bad. All right. Let's look at it from the perspective of the teachings of the Buddha, in the sense of right speech. Because what you did just then was you added Christianity to Buddhism. The actual teachings of the Buddha is that right speech has to do with telling the truth, saying things the way that they actually are, and that we will do that because we're no longer, let us say, afraid of the retribution, that the wrongdoing itself is what we're trying to avoid. Okay, it's the wrongdoing itself that we're trying to avoid. And so what happens with people who are not telling the truth and lying is because they're trying to conceal their wrongdoing, their bad habits, from other people. It's more like that they're shy or embarrassed. And because of that, we will tell sometimes really outrageous lies rather than dealing with the truth. So wrong speech generally has to do then with mental states that we're in. So another example of wrong speech, musawada, vairamane, sakabadam, samatiyami, by the way, is the precept. Musawada, which means not using harmful speech or wrong speech. So telling a direct lie. And also a different kind of example of that is what we in our society call guessing. Our teachers, in fact, to make their lives easier, they give us tests where we're expected to guess the answer. If you had all essay kind of questions, then there would be no guessing to it. Or if your math question says, what is the answer to this formula? But no, they give a check and give the students 4 chances of answering the question and guessing it right. So we're supposed to guess, right? But isn't that a kind of a false speech? Because we're saying, I know something, when in fact we don't. It's not being honest with ourselves when we guess. And here we're dealing with real reality. So let's not guess the answers. Let's do it. Hang on, Christoph. I'll get right back to you. I want to cover the right speech first. Okay, so the next item on the item is malicious gossip. The word malicious intentionally there. And this is a big item in psychology, especially in transactional analysis, where the psychologists actually analyze the transactions between people. And we find that there is a kind of game that we play. One of the games is, let's pull a fast one on Joy, or let's you and him fight. That's what really is malicious gossip, is trying to talk somebody into hating someone, trying to break them apart. Okay? An example of that would be, oh, don't go to that Dhamma teacher. He's no good and he doesn't know what he's talking about. And I just said that to the #1 prime student of that teacher, right? That's false speech. That's wrong speech. That's garbage speech. And we normally do it to try to take advantage. But if we don't need any advantage, then we're not trying to break up other people. We're not trying to divide them. We're looking at friendship. Oh, well, your teacher is pretty good. Look how what benefit you've got from him, and go ahead and go it in that direction. There's also two kinds of speech left now. One of them would be frivolous speech. And a certain amount of frivolous speech is not so bad when it's all about Dhamma anyway. But if you can find the Dhamma within speech that some people would call frivolous, it's not quite so frivolous. It's got some value to it. But then there is a kind of frivolity that has no value because people will become competitive and they'll wind up in bad feelings from it. Okay, so frivolous talk would be like talking about politics. And you can talk politics and get some agreement and talk more politics, and then you get into disagreements. That's what frivolous talk about. To where if you're talking about something that's real and true and you know about it, then that's not frivolous. It's the facts. So the last one, which is the one that you're talking about, and that would be harsh speech. Now, there is a certain kind of language that we use when we're having false speech, or let us say harsh speech, is generally when we're full of bad feelings. And I hate something, and I want to let you know how bad I hate it by using low-class language. The funny thing is that Bhikkhu Buddhadasa also used low-class slang language. And yet all of the translations out of the Thai are in very, very highfalutin kind of language. The translators work very hard to get a good grasp of English language so that they can out-sophisticate Bhikkhu Buddhadasa with his low-class language. To where, in fact, he uses that low-class language to get people's attention. One of them is that in the Thai language there is a word gu, said in a really ugly, guttural way, which is a way of talking about me or myself. And he will use that kind of language in order to point out to people what's going on. So, what we do with our Western mindset is we recognize that the FCC in Hollywood has had a long tradition of an argument over what language is allowed and what language is not allowed, which is not an issue for the Buddha or Buddhism at all. That's an issue over Christianity and that kind of language. And yet Christians use foul language all the time. Oh my God would be an example of that, or what the fuck. And so this would be low class or harsh language. And the point of it is when is it harsh and when is it making a point? That it's not the word itself.
Yeah.
And in fact, if you've heard some of the videos, I wear the label of asshole. I was a first class asshole when I was a young man. Now I'm a really sophisticated asshole.
Well,
But go ahead, Daniel.
So when you talk about that you have to speak the truth, then you could say that if you ask someone, a lot of teachers directly, if they are enlightened, they will lie to you, just to give an example. And isn't there also sometimes the case that telling the truth can endanger some other people? For example, when you're fleeing a country at war and you have to conceal your identity. So is it then not right to tell a lie?
What that means to me is that we just didn't flee soon enough. We didn't see the war coming. We saw it after it arrived. We weren't watching what's going on. I would imagine that most of the Russians should have left Russia last year. That would have been the time to leave Russia. Is last year. So we waited too long. We weren't awake enough. We didn't see what was happening. Like the United States is in a pretty bad state also right now, right? But I saw that in 1970 during the Nixon administration. I said, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
Okay, so um, you got to do what you got to do once you've gotten yourself stuck. We're talking about the process of getting unstuck, to not get stuck up with stuff anymore. Just like you got stuck up with whatever word did I used?
Asshole.
Huh? Asshole. Well, that was no. There was another one before that.
Oh, okay. I don't remember.
Any case, you see that I'm using the word asshole in a quite jovial kind of way. If I called you a dirty asshole, that would be false. That would be harsh.
Even if it's meant in a good way,
Well, if it's meant in a good way, then that's the intention. That's the whole point. What's going to be your intention? But they say that the highway to hell is paved with good intentions. You've heard that? Right?
Yeah.
Well, the problem with that is that they were paving with good intentions, but they never did the survey in the first place, and they plotted their path to hell ignorantly. So good intentions don't have to go to hell. So most of the good intentions, the highway to hell is paved with good intentions, is ignorant intentions. Because we didn't look where we were going, didn't see what was happening. So it's always coming back to this little drop of water, this 1, 2, 3. Look at what we're doing. Wake up, look at what we're doing, and make a change over and over and over again until you can get that lightheartedness, and then the language itself don't matter anymore. And in fact, George Carlin made a very, very humorous talk about those 7 deadly words from Hollywood. You can't use these words, right? And yet he's making a joke out of every one of them.
I would love to see that. If you can share it later on, I will watch it for sure.
Okay, well, it's on YouTube.
All right.
Yeah, George Carlin's got a lot of old stuff that's on YouTube. So let's finish this with the false speech and get over to what Christoph was wanting to ask about.
I have a question about the suttas. So my native language is Dutch, and strange as it may seem, most of the suttas are translated in Dutch, and they are actually done quite well by Professor De Breed and Janssen, who were Buddhists themselves. So I have the suttas, but it was more or less a collection, just to have it. So I've started reading them little by little, and it seems that you mostly go back or refer to the Majjhima Nikaya. Is that the place to start? Is it better to focus our attention to the Majjhima Nikaya, or what do you suggest?
Actually, yes. I do the Majjhima Nikaya for several reasons. One, the joke of it is that the Majjhima Nikaya starts where the Buddha ended. It was the first council. After the Buddha's death, they had a long council. It took them about 3 months to get the council together, and then the council lasted for about maybe 9 months or a year or something like that. A lot of stories about it. But the important thing is that the outcome of that conference was that they collected the suttas that are arranged in the Majjhima Nikaya, gave various groups the responsibility of keeping those suttas alive. Some of them got written down, others got into the chanting. But that's basically it. That's the end of it. Everything else that came after that is only the words of monks that may or may not be repeating what the Buddha said. There is also some earlier literature. The earlier literature is like the Sutta Nipata and the Udana, and that you'll find many of the later suttas, like, for instance, number 16 in the Dhamma Nikaya. The Dhamma Nikaya, the long group, was written at about the time of Ashoka, about 150 years afterwards. and that there is the sutta that I'm mentioning, number 16, is called the Mahaparinirvana Sutta, which is the sutta about the Buddha's death. And I thought that that was a marvelous sutta when I started to read it, because I was, an ignoramus. Later on, I found out that that whole sutta was lifted from earlier data. That sutta came into existence because of research and rereading and rewriting stuff and adding a few points here and there, but that it was not from the time of the Buddha. All you need to know about the Buddha's death is in the Udana and the Sutta Nipata, not in the Mahaparinirvana Sutta. So that's the way of looking at it. Now, there's also some really, really profound one-liners that are in the later suttas. We can't do without it. In fact, a lot of the stuff that we have to deal with nowadays is because of the stuff that was done after the time of the Buddha, and then some suttas were written to try to correct that wrong kind of thinking. The example that I'm thinking about is the distinction between samatha and vipassana. Because nowadays, in some quarters, they're making a great big deal about, do you practice one or do you practice the other? And that division did not exist in the time of the Buddha.
Mm-hmm.
That in fact, samatha is referred to primarily as first jhana, and vipassana was not hardly ever mentioned in the Majjhima Nikaya, though some of the translators have used it as a column heading, or a place for all of this now is the vipassana part. But the vipassana itself is a foreign kind of word that it's not in the suttas very much. And so now we find in the Anguna Nikaya 4 or 5 suttas that talk about samatha and vipassana. But the point about the suttas is all that they're the same thing. Don't make a distinction between the two. That you cannot do for first jhana without some investigation. And you cannot have the first sutta without having the peace and quiet. They are together. They go together. There's no reason to have a distinction between the two. And one of the suttas says that if you have vipassana, but you don't have any samatha, then go get that one that you're missing. If you've got samatha but not vipassana, go get the vipassana. The reality in the suttas is that they have to be done together. If you do one without the other, would be very, very difficult. And in fact, you could see that, in fact, that was what the Buddha was doing in the first place. He was all for jhana because he thought that was all there was to it, but he didn't know what to do with the jhanas once he got them. And so he discarded them as unuseful. And then he went into self-flagellation and trying to burn off all the old karma, and he figured out that that wasn't right. And so he sat down and he started to figure out actually what the mind is doing and how it works. And he already had all the skills that he needed to do that. He had already been through the 4 jhanas without getting any value out of them. Now he's going back. And so that was the way of the Buddha, that he got samatha first and then vipassana. But it took him at least 6 or 7 years to do that. And so doing what the Buddha did is not recommending. Doing it the way that the Buddha says to do it is the recommended way. Now in the Sutta number 10, in the Satipatthana Sutta, it talks about it in the sense of the direct method, the shortcut. And the shortcut is to do both of them together. Okay, imagine a right triangle, and you're at one end and you're going down to the hypotenuse, but the way that we do that is we have to go from A to B and then from B to C, rather than going directly from A to C. It's a shorter distance. And this little example of that triangle works in many, many cases. You can see how we use it in regular society. The example that I think of quite often is the chick magnet. You got to go buy the car, and the car will get the chick. You got to go from A to B, and then B will get you to C. And we have to rearrange our thought processes. No, we're going to take the direct method. We're going to go, we can do without the car. We'll be our own check magnet is an expression that we could use in that case. But there are many, many examples of where we do one in order to get the other. Like, for instance, you want an easy life, so what do? You get a job. You get a job so you can get some money. You get some money so that you can get a house. You get a house so you can get some food. You get some food, and then look at all the, A to B to C to D, and you never got to the end of it after all. So the best thing to do is to go right after it. So that's one of the sections of the later suttas that has enormous value. And sometimes, without understanding the context of it, people get really, really off base. An example of that is in the Samyutta Nikaya, which has, I think, 57 or so different sections. And one of the sections is on Sotapan. And if you read what's in there in that section of Sotapan, you'll get so confused about what a Sotapan is, you'll never figure it out. In fact, that seems to be where all of them on Reddit in the Sotapan section or in the stream entry section is because they're getting all of that stuff out of the suttas that was a compilation of things. To where if you really want to know what Sotapan is all about, go read Sutta number 48, the Kosambian Sutta, because it's got the steps of Sotapan laid out specifically and directly. And when you understand that, you can see, oh, well, that's where they get all of this stuff in the Samyutta Nikaya from. They're taking that aspect and making the sutta, and that aspect and making the sutta, and they don't put it together the way that it's put together.
Sorry, what sutta is that? I want to write it down.
48.
What?
Which sutta is that? Can you say it slowly?
Kosambian Sutta.
Okay, can you maybe write that in the chat? Because I can't hear
Number 48. You just type in MN 48.
Okay,
and after
thank
you
you.
get past Minnesota stuff, you'll find the sutta. That's it, MN 48.
Thank you, Scott.
So you cannot find out what a Sotapan is by reading the entire section of the book on Sotapan, but you can by getting it out of this one sutta in the Majjhima Nikaya. So
to make it clear for me, you suggest to start with the Majjhima Nikaya, the Sutta Nipata, and Udana.
Well, since the book that you've got in Dutch, I imagine that they're all kind of mixed together.
No. They are really translated part by part. It's maybe 30 volumes or something.
Oh, they've got the entire Tripitaka.
Yes. Surprisingly, as it is, it's Dutch is an extremely small language, but in that case, we are very advanced, I would say.
I congratulate you for that. Okay, so that's the place to start. Mm-hmm. Then, in fact, if you don't mind, I'll show you something. This is the Majjhima Nikaya. It's the second edition.
Okay, yeah, I have
the
this
second
one
edition
by
was like
year
2000. So this book is 20 years old. You can smell how old it is, all right? But it's in really good shape. This is the first edition.
Oh.
It is literally falling apart.
I get your point.
It also has a whole lot of notes written all through it.
Okay, I get your point.
Comparing one sutta to the next and whatnot like that.
Okay.
And so that's the book. I use the Majjhima Nikaya, and I've had that one since 25 years now or so. And
what translation is it? Is it the Bodhi translation?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, that's the one I read from in the Wednesday meeting.
Mm-hmm. It is very poetic. I really like the translation. It's got a lot of mistakes in it, but the language that it uses is quite poetic.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's easier to remember. And as you heard me, I quote suttas often, a passage here and there. That in fact, going back to that sutta number 48, the first truth, or excuse me, the first knowledge is so profound because it actually fits directly within the Eightfold Noble Path. And that is that it does not matter how obstructed the mind is. The student understands that he can throw that set of hindrances, he can throw those thoughts out of his mind and see things the way that they really are, to see the truth of the matter, to see reality. This is the first knowledge that is super mundane, a factor of the path. It is noble, and it is not held by ordinary people. Everybody, all the ordinary people are victims. This is actually the beginning mentality of the winner. That's the first step into Sotapan is, darn it, I know I can fix this problem up here. I know I can do it. Because I've done it so many times before. I've cleaned this clock so often I even know the gears by name. But we have to do that over and over and over again. And it builds the confidence. And that kind of confidence, that kind of, I know that I can clean this stuff out. That's the first step of the Sotapan. And yet I don't hear that, I haven't seen that anywhere in the Samyutta Nikaya. They talk about, oh, you have to delete the first 3 fetters, and you have to take the triple gem and all of that kind of stuff. But the first step really is you got to clean house. And you got to clean house, and you got to clean it over and over and over again until you know that you can do this, that you can clean this thing out, because it's going to get dirty again. And you can clean it out again. And it'll get dirty again, and you can clean it out again. And you're getting kind of skilled at being able to clean out the mind. So that's an important point about that sutta, is to recognize that that's the first state of nobility, is to know that you can clean house. All right. I read part of that. So, Christoph, you still got your hand up.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Okay. All right. Well, actually, we gotten started. I was intending to get over into the 7 factors of enlightenment, and we only got started with just the first one. But the important point about that, the Sambhojana, is that it has an adjective for every one of them, and that adjective is unremitting. What does unremitting mean? It doesn't mean all the time. It doesn't mean constantly. It means that it comes back. That sati, if you practice it, will come back. And if you practice it well, it'll come back when you need it. And when do you need it? Right now. Right now is when we need it. If we can remember right now that we can clean out our mind, that makes it unremitting. So no matter what happens, you wind up in the hospital, you're getting arrested, you're in prison, you're trying to escape the country because it's at war, any of those kind of things is an opportunity to wake up and recognize, hey, you're still alive, you're okay, no problems here. Yeah, so what if you get enlisted and you wind up in Ukraine? You could do like all the other Russian soldiers, and that's just hang out and enjoy your life. It may not be a long one, but you don't have to get frustrated and try to hate people and shoot a gun at people. You can just sit back and do nothing. But it would have been better to sit back and do nothing instead of being out there where you can get captured and recruited and drafted. You need to find where the dangers are and stay away from them. That in fact, in that regard, the Buddha set it up. I don't know which sutras it's in. I think it's in the Vinaya, where there are 4 places, 4 abodes to stay away from. And that is a war zone. Stay away from war zones. Don't go there. The people are already frustrated enough without having to hear the fact that. So, another one is droughts or floods. The next one is pestilence, whether it's the size of COVID or the size of a grasshopper. That whole range of things, when the people are sick, that's a good place to stay away from. You want to be around healthy people that don't have to deal with floods and don't have to deal with war and don't have to deal with a famine. Okay? If that's the way that we can think about it in a big way, we could start living our lives that way. Oh, don't go into that place because they're having an argument in there. Stay away from those war zones. If they're having a food fight, don't go there. Stay away from those kind of places. And we can begin to figure out that, oh, we have a choice in advance, that we don't have to get ourselves into a situation where we really need that first knowledge so much. But in fact, if we are already able to avoid those places, we've already got the sati. To wake up, take a look, and to get the heck out of there. Change your location. Change your mindset. Stay away from the dangers. This is the way of the practice of the Buddha, is to take it easy. Relax. But we need to find the places that are worthy of relaxation, because a lot of places are dangerous. And so we want to make sure that we understand when dangers are around, and so we're not around there. And we have to look to remember. Well, Scott, I think that in fact we've had quite a while of it. We've been going at it about an hour and 20 minutes. And so the last thing that I wanted to say anyway was that whole quality of unremitting. That if we catch things really early, we make our lives a whole lot easier. So let's not wait for the sati to come up when we really need it. Let's put it up in advance so that we can avoid needing it so badly. Go ahead, Scott.
Yeah, one thing I want to say, like from personal experience, from doing the simple right now practice of changing the thought. Like at first, I would do it kind of spaced out. Like I would remember, like I would actually do it, but then not do it for maybe like a couple more days or even a week. And then I would do it, and then I would do it maybe a couple of days later, and then I would do it, and then I would start to do it like multiple times within the same day, and then I would do it, and then I would do it to where it's just like it becomes like just a compulsive
Nothing else
habit.
worth doing.
Yeah, so it kind of like it just like comes back more and more.
Mm-hmm.
Like
in the beginning we have to practice, but after we
Yeah.
keep practicing and keep practicing, it becomes unremitting. It will come back.
Yeah.
Sati has a kind of an energy of its own. And in fact, that's the part of the 7 factors of enlightenment, that the effort that we put in the Eightfold Noble Path winds up being an energy that it too is also unremitting. Just like we keep looking. If we can have unremitting sati, then we have unremitting investigation, and then we'll have the unremitting energy that we need to make the change. And it takes practice to build up over and over and over again, just like Scott was saying. And so practice well. And then, you took a break. So what? Let's come back and start practicing again and practicing again. This is the method that we use. It's a very, very simple method, but it is completely liberating. Okay, so everybody got any last words? Any news? Any gospels? Everybody's okay with this. Patrick, what do you think?
Sounds good.
Okay, how about you, Jamie?
Yes, let's do it.
Yeah. I've seen you've been smiling and nodding your head. You and Scott are getting on the same wavelength. I've been watching the two of you with your heads bobbing up and down together.
It's the jhana field.
Uh-huh.
The unsurpassed field of merit. It goes
Yes.
through the cosmic interwebs.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we just did. Christoph and I just did a tape yesterday about him finding out that he goes into those states of joy easily now. He's practicing, and so we mentioned the fact that these talks that we have are actually not just entertaining, but they are also skill building.
Right.
You have, because you get into the for a little while on the talks when we're all together, we all get into that rhythm together of wow, this is good stuff.
Yeah.
Excellent. So Veda, do you
Actually, I
have
had
any?
a question about that.
All right.
There are so many monks that look so serious and so cold. So why is it even when you talked about Mahasi or Upandita, that he was a very serious man? So I'm wondering, why is that? Why are they not jumping with excitement,
Well,
with happiness?
actually, you can go directly to peace, but there's a difference between being very peaceful and wanting power. And that was where that situation was, is that seriousness comes from wanting something. And
But
the
even
joy comes
Mahasi,
from the recognition you've already got everything you need.
okay.
All
But
you have to do to get out of your seriousness is stop wanting stuff. Be happy and satisfied with this moment.
But I remember you saying that Mahasi was, for example, a very serious person. And
I'm not sure about Mahasi himself because I never knew him. But
okay.
I do know that in one of his books that there is a whole section about joy. That in fact you could think of that the major mistake that's made is that we keep doing it in the order that the Buddha did, because he had an audience that understood things the way that they did understand it, but we don't. We're starting out as kind of fresh. And so doing it in the same order and the same way that the Buddha did often makes us not get it. All right? And Bhikkhu Buddhadasa is the same way. You read a book on Anapanasati. In fact, I've got my favorite here. And the part about gladdening the mind is done in order of the sutta, and it's on page 218 when when Bhikkhu Buddhadasa says about the joy. This is the first thing that you've got to do is to feel
On
that
page
joy, and
218.
it's on page 218 of the book.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
the way
So
that I'm teaching is let's do what we can do first. Let's get the joy up. Let's change the mind, and then it will settle down. That it's much better to gain peace from a high of satisfaction and joy, and it we come down to equanimity like that. We finally find that resting place after we've done the joy part. It's impossible for the human mind to come out of misery and drudgery up to a neutral place. They'll fall right back down into the misery. No, you have to find the landing spot from, let us say, by gliding downhill, not climbing to the top of a mountain. A lot of people think of that the teaching of the Buddha is climbing a mountain. And then once you get to the summit, you can rest. No, this is completely different than that. We've got to get the mountain really, really early. And that is the mountain of really, really good feelings. And after that, it's all downhill. It's an easy journey.
it's for me so hard to imagine how peace can be better than being on top of the hill with happy feelings and all.
When you recognize how good you can feel, and how much actual work that is, then you can feel a little bit more peaceful and not have to put any work in it at all. So we have to put that effort in the beginning and put the effort in until we reach those peak experiences of being the champion, being on top of our world, getting that lion's roar inside, becoming that lion, getting our mojo, etc., like that. And after we get that, there's no place to go. And so we kind of relax. And we relax and relax and relax. But you can't start off relaxing.
Yeah.
Because it's such an uphill climb. So we got to get the climbing done soon. All right.
And the book you mentioned, you said that this is your favorite book on Anapanasati?
No, I don't want to get it out now. They gave it away for free at Watso and Moke years ago, and I'm not sure of where to get it now.
Okay. So, I want to read up more on Anapanasati. Is there any book in particular that you recommend?
Well, the book that I'm recommending that I don't know where it is right now, I'll have to go rummage around in the house. I'll give you the information that you're asking right now later.
Okay, thank you.
Is it Bhikkhu Buddhadasa's book or?
What about Bhikkhu Buddhadasa?
Is it his book on Anapanasati you're recommending?
Actually, there have been 4 books published.
Okay.
By him, or not by him, but 4 books published of talks that he has given on Anapanasati, 4 different books. The latest one is Santicaro's book that was done in 1988. And then there's a really, really old one, the very first thing that was done in 1950s or 60s, and that's not a very good translation. So there's another book that I've never seen. I've heard about it. And then the 4th one is the one that I'm using here. So there are actually 4 books by Bhikkhu Buddhadasa on Anapanasati. That should be an indication that he thought the topic was worth talking about. Okay, guys. Well, let's finish up now. This has been a really good time. I really enjoyed it. I'm glad that everybody's got a great big smile.
Thank you, Dhammarato. See you later.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Stay together on the Discord.